Kenya is schizophrenic. We are neither to the east nor to the west. We are confused. There are others who are pro-west and others who are pro-east, and ultimately we end up with session of paper number 10 of 1965 on what we call African socialism, but ultimately we are bought by the West, and we have remained so bought. I'm a king, yes. And you East Africans must always be reminded about this. In 1962, Julius Kambarage Nyerere actually agreed to postpone the independence of Tanzania so that Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania could be independent as one nation. He came here and talked to Kabaka, Mutesa then, and Apollo Milton Obote, and even to Benjamin Kiwanuka, and asked them, let us delay, I'm delaying our independence. He came to Kenya and talked to Jomo Kenyatta and said, I'm delaying my independence. And this is what Mwalimu said. He said, I'm prepared because you, Kenyatta, are older, you will become the president, and what I want is to be ambassador of East Africa to the United Nations. Many people do not know that reality because he was able to recognize very early that these post-colonial states which divided ethnicities arbitrarily were not sustainable. So in Tanganyika, you also have the revolution in Zanzibar with Sheikh Amani Abeid Karume, and in 1964, there is the union between Tanganyika and Zanzibar to create Tanzania, which then leads to the death of #1 TANU, and leads to the death of Afro-Shirazi Party, and leads to the formation of Chama cha Mapinduzi in 1977. And you can see that Tanzania is also grappling. They are saying, we have this constitution, but where is constitutionalism? What is it that answers to our Tanzania-ness? And it is in that context that you must understand the Arusha Declaration of 1967, because it is a search for Tanzania-ness. It is a search for Tanzania-ness. Apollo Milton Obote, who is a protege of Nyerere, also takes that path and thinks that the common man's charter is a search for Ugandan-ness. In Kenya, we even found something that is called the Lumumba Institute, named for Patrice Emery Lumumba. But Kenya is schizophrenic. We are neither to the east nor to the west. We are confused. There are others who are pro-west and others who are pro-east, and ultimately we end up with session of paper number 10 of 1965 on what we call African socialism, but ultimately we are bought by the West, and we have remained so bought. When we come to Rwanda, Urundi, the conflict is manufactured. The Belgians have created an environment which is going to be a powder keg in both Rwanda and in Burundi in 1962. They have attacked the monarchy in Rwanda. They have created animosity between two peoples whom they call the Tutsi and the Hutu. And ultimately, you now have this conflict that you have the genocide in 1959, and ultimately the genocide in 1994, and the ongoing animus between Rwanda and Burundi. And of course, we know the Paul Kagame administration that is still in power. And RPF is also in the nature of a political movement which is a liberator. So that if you look at the intellectual inclination of the two leaders of Uganda and Rwanda, they are ideologically of the same persuasion. Ideologically, because they were liberators, and their thinking is that they are people who are indispensable, and they have no shortage of people who also tells them that you are Moses holding rod and staff in your hand, parting Red Seas. We want you to continue parting Red Seas. They are caught up between the adoration by the people that they lead and the demands of these things you call constitutionalism. So when you talk to President Yoweri Museveni or you talk to Paul Kagame and you tell them, let us have term limits, he says, but that is Western democracy. My people still think that I should serve them. Who are you? And that argument, there are those who think it is a legitimate question and is a legitimate issue. Those of you who are readers of Shakespeare will remember that there is a play by Shakespeare called Measure for Measure. It was written in the year 1623. And one of the quotations you get there is that if you have the power of a giant, it is excellent to have the power of a giant, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant. And there is also a saying, I've repeated it times without number, that no matter how good a dancer you are, you must know when to leave the stage. This is, when we talk about term limits, this is what we are saying. And Nyerere put it so very well in 1985. He said, you are not successful until your successor succeeds. So when we talk about constitutionalism, we must remind ourselves that there is also culture with which we are fighting. There is a cultural issues. If you are an Omugabe or a Kabaka, you don't cede power. It's God who denies you when he takes you upstairs. How do we deal with those realities? So when we talk about that, then you can see the difficulties with freedom fighters. Those of you who had the advantage of working with Nyerere, I interned with him when he left power. And actually, before 1984, 9th day of December, when I first met him, he understood the dynamics of power. He understood the dynamics of and the frailty of the African nation, the post-colonial African nation. Tanzania has 136 ethnicities, governed differently before the colonialists came. Then you gridlock them into this thing called Tanzania. And he asked, what is Tanzania? Because the first point of identification is that I'm a Mhaya. I'm a Mnyamwezi. How do you reconcile your Nyamweziness with your Tanzanianness? When you come to Uganda, you are Baganda, you are Acholi. How do you reconcile your Bagandaness and Koleness, Acholiness with your Ugandanness? In the context of this broad brush constitution that talks about an independent judiciary, talks about a legislature, talks about the civil society, talks about the executive, and talks about human rights, which according to that constitution were conceived with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When you go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, there are 233 ethnicities and counting. So that when that country is regaining her independence in 1960 with Patrice Emery Lumumba, on day number 1, and I want you to listen to the speech of Lumumba on the day that they were being granted independence. Listen to the speech of Lumumba and the speech of Kasavubu. On that day, these are two people going to lead a nation, and they are already thinking differently. And no wonder within 9 months, Lumumba had been assassinated, leading, of course, to Kasavubu and ultimately to the kakistocratic kleptocracy of Mobutu Sese Seko. And Congo has never been at rest. So you can have the best constitution you have, but he's talking about Bakongo. He's talking about Bangala. He's talking about Batetela. How do you deal with that? That is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Then we come to Somalia. What is Somalia? Somalia that we know was actually, part of it was a colony of the Italians. And then there was a Somaliland, which was a colony of the United Kingdom. On the eve of independence, they are united. And that is why you now see what is happening. If you saw the original flag of Somalia, it has 5 stars. to talk about the Somali nation. Somalis in Somalia, Somalis in Ogaden in Ethiopia, Somalis in Djibouti, Somalis in Somaliland. So there is what in law is called irredentism, the desire to claim lost territory, which still, and of course Somalis in Kenya. When you have a constitution that is irredentist in character, how do you have constitutionalism in that regard? And South Sudan. The history of South Sudan is known. And I always remind people to remember that when the Anglo-British group said that South Sudan would be a closed district, the north in Khartoum had been Islamized and Arabized. The south, they say, the English not us, they say, were animist and Christian. And of course, I want you to listen to these words in the year 2009 of John Garang de Mabior. Garang de Mabior goes to Khartoum and says, if you want us to remain as one nation, make unity attractive. Make unity. Garang did not want the split between Sudan and South Sudan. He wanted a united Sudan. But he said, make unity attractive. Ultimately, he dies. We have the administration that we have. But the administration is now a victim of ethnic nationalism. And what is ethnic nationalism flying in the face of a constitution? The constitutions are innocent. The nationalism, the Dinka or the Jiang are saying, we are the ones who fought for independence, therefore we must have the cake. The Nuer or the North are saying, we also participated in the struggle for independence, we must have the cake. The Shilluk or the Ocholo are also saying the same thing. The Equatorians are also saying the same thing. So you have a constitution which is only honored in breach. The razzmatazz that was there on the day of independence is immediately attacked by the trials of tribulations of a wedding where the two couples are sleeping on the same bed, but the wife has different dreams and the husband has different dreams. And that is why South Sudan ends up where she is now, the only country in the whole earth with 5 vice presidents. And why do you need? It may look stupid on the face of it, but he is addressing a reality on the ground. That one of our own is there. It is a feel-good effect. It doesn't give you matoke on the table, but it makes you feel good, one of our own. These are the realities that we confront in the continent of Africa. As I draw to the conclusion of my presentation, that gives you a scenario of what constitutionalism is about. But let us look at the attempt. In 1963, between the dates of 22nd of May and the 25th of May, there is a meeting of the 32 heads of states and government of the countries that had regained independence in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. 32 of them. Everybody who spoke recognized how weak the states are. I remember the speech of a leader whom many of us do not know, out of a country that we do not know, but as I speak is in turmoil, Central African Republic, David Dacko. David Dacko says, I'm happy to be here because the little country that I had called Central African Republic cannot succeed. I am for unity. Julius Kambarage Nyerere says, we have come here not to remind ourselves of the significance of unity. Unite we must. Ultimately, the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah speaks. And he says, if we are serious, then let us live here with one common currency. Let us live here with one army. Let us live here with one foreign policy. Let us live here having decided the capital of the new country called Africa. I do not know what others will say, but on my part, I propose Leopoldville in DRC, which is now Kinshasa. They listen to him not. And we are where we are, grappling with constitutionalism. We in East Africa also recognize the significance of having unity as something that would immunize us from ethnicity. And we had the East African Federation from 1967 through to 1977. And many of you here will remember nostalgically General Mugisha Muntu, Miriam Matembe, my good friend. East African Airways. It worked. Today we have Ugandan loss-making, Tanzania loss-making, Kenya loss-making. East African harbors, telecommunication. We sat one examination. There were good days. Then we lost it all. Then in 1999, we came up with what is now East African Community 2. And we said in the new treaty that we'll have a customs union, a common market, common currency, and ultimately a political union. But the leaders were not satisfied. So that Benjamin William Mkapa, Mwai Kibaki, and Yoweri Museveni himself agree in the year 2004 to appoint a committee for fast-tracking of political federation in order to ensure that we enjoy rights. The fast-tracking report is delivered to the heads of state, the summit, on the 30th day of November in Arusha, 2004, and these were the landmarks. In the year 2009, we would have a common currency. We should be having a common currency. In January 2010, the president of East African Federation would have been appointed. We don't have one 14 years later. And in 2017, we now downgraded it. It's no longer a federation, but a confederation. I can talk until the cows come home, but there is no wisdom in so talking. Wisdom only demands that I remind us that the continent of Africa, having talked about Africa, is now in a space where people are grappling with the question of the nexus between constitutions and constitutionalism. We are grappling, as to use the Mao analogy, whether the promises made at the wedding will be fulfilled during the marriage. This is the question. And it would appear that that is not happening almost everywhere in Africa. It would appear that the gap between the promise and the delivery, there is something, because I hear people grumbling in South Africa. I hear them grumbling. I hear them grumbling in Namibia. I hear them grumbling. I hear them fighting as I speak in Mozambique. There is an election and we can't even count votes. The Africans can't count votes. The Americans counted 18 million votes within 10 hours. In Kenya, it takes us 2 weeks. In Nigeria, even longer. In Uganda, I don't know how long it takes you, but even when they are counted, you don't agree. And if you look at Africa today, the issue of constitutionalism, this is what is bringing in war. The Ethiopians thought through Meles Zenawi in 1984 that they would immunize Ethiopia from this kind of constitutional turbulence by saying in the constitution that you could actually have secession. And what do we have now? We have had a war in Tigray. There is a threat of war in Oromo. There is an ongoing war in Amhara. And there is a possibility of another conflagration in the Ogaden. Even Ethiopia is suffering. South Sudan Even only yesterday, President Salva Kiir has once again appointed a new team to go for the Tumaini conference in Nairobi. South Sudan itself, there is war. Chad in the Sahel. The organization, African Union, says there will be no unconstitutional changes of power under the Malabo Declaration. We have had unconstitutional change in Gabon, in Niger, in Burkina, in Guinea, and a near successful one in Guinea-Bissau. In other words, what we see as we interrogate these issues is this: how do we ensure that our governments respect constitutions? As Fidel Castro once said, when you are pushing the door of revolution, never say die, because you never know when the door will open. In fact, when you are getting tired, that is when the door is about to open. And I believe that one of the things must happen is that we must increase the political maturity of the masses. It is Corazon Cojuangco Aquino in Philippines who said that if the masses do not understand what a constitution is, then what you call an election is nothing but a conspiracy of fools. In other words, it is incumbent upon us to make the masses awake. When the masses are awake, then they'll make demands, because it is still true, as Marx once said, that the safety of the bourgeois demands that the proletariat be kept in the most profound ignorance. And next to ignorance, the worst thing is the arrogance of power. And it can only be nipped through awareness. That is the lesson of history throughout the world. And I hope that in East Africa, we shall be moving through debate. See, lastly, as I grow older, when people tell me democracy, I tell them, what does it mean? Because the Westerners appear to be telling us that democracy equals to multi-party, equals to periodic elections, equals to separation of powers notionally, executive, judiciary, and legislature, equal to having Bill of Rights. You can all have all these, but they are empty shells. In order to have the real thing, the real deal, the people must be aware. That is the lesson of history. And I hope that these engagements will give us the impetus to continue making demands, but speak with the firmness that opens the eyes of the leader, not with the arrogance and stupidity that inflames and justifies their anger. That is my message to all of us. And lastly, remember, this is an intergenerational struggle. So if you imagine that all the dividends of your battle will be won during your lifetime, you are deluding yourself. Run your race, run your leg, hand over the baton to one generation and the next generation, and lo and behold, when history is written, it shall be said, there lived a great generation who ran their race well. Thank you.
I'm a king, yes, I'm a king, I think I'm a king,